62. Aaron Paul is quietly exceptional in the party-centric scenes, a sea of people drinking, drugs, and deafening music acting as a coping mechanism for Pinkman due to the utterly traumatizing Gail Bedecker incident. The scene in which an armed Walter approaches Gus's house before Tyrus calls, ordering for Walt to go home, is tense, featuring some slick cinematography. Though I must admit, as much as I can understand Walt is in a place of desperation, I've never been a massive fan of this small, strapped Walter plot for one simple reason. I find it to be a wee bit too rash. Walt, who loves his family, knows how vast and dangerous Gus's organization is. Gus is, of course, the head of the snake, but for example, if Walt successfully shot Gus at the lab like he had intended, what's the next step? If Walt doesn't instantly flee with his family, they're all as good as dead, and he doesn't have access to Ed the Disappearer at this point. It's always bumped me a bit, probably the only plotline within this otherwise practically perfect show to do so. 61. Marie's kleptomania-centric coping mechanism is a very interesting and understandable character trait in regard to Hank's mistreatment of her at this point. While the scene in which Skylar, with the assistance of the great Bill Burr's Patrick Cuby, cons Walt's former boss Bogdan in order to ultimately acquire the car wash at a lesser price is such a blast, and a slickly edited one at that. 60. I kind of like the initially surprising fact that the aftermath of the IFT affair largely deals in comedy. For example, when bitch boy Ted is cowering in his office as an exasperated Walt tosses this enormous plant at his office window before it awkwardly bounces off and Walt is reprimanded. A nice little subversion of expectations, as after first watching the previous episode, I was practically expecting Walt to castrate this prick. 59. We get some brilliant dialogue between Walt and Gus. Mr. White, of course, doing the vast majority of the talking. Anna Gunn is exceptional in the scene in which she conjures up a lie in order to help out the Schraders financially, before stating to Walt that she had learned from the best. 58. I adore the scene in which Walt has dinner at Gus's home. It's a complete and utter treat whenever Cranston and Esposito are alone together opposite one another. It's great fun seeing Skylar meet Saul Goodman, while the twist that Andrea's brother Tomas is the individual behind the murder of Jesse's old pal Christian Combo Ortega is f***ing great, narratively, creatively. It's simply a shocking story beat, Jesse's reaction to which being perfectly and authentically performed by Aaron Paul. 57. I've read/seen many an individual give Fly flack. I personally quite enjoy this bottle episode, which on the surface is quite simple, minimal, not particularly eventful, but when you really break it down, this is a really wonderfully directed by the great Rian Johnson episode that is dripping in subtext and tackles such concepts as guilt and obsession, whilst featuring an excellent and committed performance from Cranston, both he and Paul getting the rare opportunity to engage in some physical comedy. 56. The episode's final IFT-centric moments are understandable, but a complete and utter gut punch nonetheless, thanks in large part due to a cold delivery from Skylar and an emotionally crushed reaction from Walter. The opening scene featuring Danny Trejo's Tortuga is quite shocking, delightfully unsettling. It's really cool seeing how exactly that human head ended up on the shell of a tortoise. 55. We're introduced to probably my favorite component of Breaking Bad's second season, the quartet of monochrome vignettes featured in episodes 1, 4, 10, and 13. It intriguingly, jarringly commences season 2, while 737 ends in particularly tense fashion as Jesse pulls up to Mr. White's house to pick him up with a strapped Tuco in the back seat. 54. Breakage is an immensely important episode for Hank as a character. We're so used to Hank being this unwavering embodiment of strength, while 205 delves into Hank's vulnerability and anxiety. Schrader taking a developmental step forward is represented by Hank tossing his former trophy, Tuco's grill, into a lake. A powerful moment. 53. Bit by a Dead Bee tells such a smartly conceived story. I'm talking about the tall tale that Walt is forced to conjure up to explain his mysterious absence. I've always had a great affinity for the scene in which Walt tells his psychiatrist a considerable amount of the truth about his genuine fearful feelings toward his current current life situation. It's beautifully written and performed by Cranston. It's also refreshing to get at least a bit of honesty out of Walt. 52. I absolutely dig the cousins' introduction and involvement in No Mas. The opening scene is rather distinct from what we've seen in the past, ending with a foreboding image, which really sets up the tone for the third season. The extraordinarily cringe-inducing scene, as a morally questionable at best Mr. White speaks to the students of J.P. Wynn, has always been kind of humorously enjoyable, while the first scene in which we focus on Jesse's support group leader is simply brilliantly captivating. His dialogue here and the profound message it conveys is so bloody memorable and poignant, as in the same breath he brings up the fact that he accidentally killed his daughter and how he learned that self-hatred accomplishes nothing. It just gets in the way of true change. 51. We're provided with the iconic but kind of frightening "I am the one who knocks" line in Cornered. We're also given a rather satisfying scene in which Walt officially acquires the car wash, as is, from former employer Bogdan, forcing him to leave behind the first dollar he ever made, only to use it to purchase a can of Coke from the vending machine. Simultaneously petty and badass. 50. Down really forces one to sympathize with Jesse as he endures what feels like an endless barrage of hardships. The big RV battle between Walt and Pinkman is definitely entertaining, also just a very interesting depiction of their exceedingly complicated relationship. And it's humorously bizarre, the fact that after this messy fight, Walt invites Jesse inside for some breakfast. 49. Cats in the Bag is a solid follow-up to the pilot. There's the truly hilarious moment in which Skyler confronts Jesse about quote-unquote selling weed to Walt, unaware that he is standing before a dead body. Then there's the wild, rather nasty ending in which human bones and such melt through the ceiling thanks to Pinkman's bathtub blunder. 48. I absolutely love the dynamic between the trio consisting of Walt, Jesse, and Mike. We get an introduction to the ever-intriguing, exceedingly anxious Lydia Rodart Quayle, portrayed by the mega talent that is Laura Fraser. Mike Ehrmantraut is a bloody badass in the scene in which he cleverly anticipates a trap set at Chow's residence before calmly popping one of his former guys, responsible for setting him up. 47. We're provided with a visually enthralling cooking montage, quite unique when compared to the rest of the show's magnificent montages. Skyler's breakdown in front of Marie is brilliantly performed by Anna Gunn and Betsy Brandt, while Walt and Mike's continued butting of heads is tense and troublesome, but always entertaining. 46. Buried is a bit of a transitional piece, but a really solid piece nonetheless, as we get a handful of effective moments. The literally quietly powerful scene between Skyler and Walt, after the latter has collapsed onto the bathroom floor due to exhaustion. Then there's the excellent scene in which Marie confronts Skyler about her personal knowledge of Walt's illegal activity, the scene ending with an emotional Marie smacking Skyler across the face. And lastly, we get the really exceptionally performed scene in which a distraught Skyler storms out on an inquisitive Hank at a diner. 45. Peekaboo really exemplifies the fact that Pinkman genuinely has a good heart. It also informs the character going forward in regard to having an extremely soft spot for innocent children. This is kind of a twisted, tragic tale that exposes the great hardships that come along with being the child of drug addicts. We also get a pretty goddamn shocking moment in which the youngster's sorry excuse for a mother crushes Spooge's head with an ATM machine. 44. We're provided with an uncomfortable but engrossing drunken confrontation between Walt and Hank as we bear witness to the Heisenberg persona bleeding into Walt's home life, while the exceedingly Heisenberg-esque ending is superimposing. 43. Aaron Paul is particularly brilliant here, as is the unexpected alliance between he and Hank, while the Jack and Todd-centric cliffhanger is rather frighteningly foreboding. 42. This episode's opening is wicked, depicting the iconic Crystal ship's origins and bringing back the late Combo, his home being particularly prevalent to Mas, as Hank's quest takes him to Combo's home, the original domain of the classic RV. And of course, Hank's visit to the Ortega household leads to Schrader discovering a connection between Jesse and his late boy's motorhome. A scene that has always been eerie and incredible to me is the one consisting of Gus introducing to Walt his potential new superlab. The musical score here is simultaneously beautiful and creepy, while Gustavo's speech to Walt about a man providing for his family no matter the circumstances is so powerfully performed by the great Mr. Esposito.